Hey everybody, I'm John Jennings with Royer Labs, and I am here with my good friend Ross Hogarth, for today's happy hour. And let me just give a little introduction here. I've known Ross for probably as long as Royer's been open. I think I can honestly say I've learned more about our microphones and what they do from Ross than anybody else, because he records so much different kind of music, and he's been very kind about letting me go to sessions and be on them with him. I remember about getting my insides torn out on a coal chamber session, standing in front of the amp when the guy starts doing this. But then I've heard some of the sweetest things go down on strings and things he's recorded. Spent a fair amount of time with him, with Kenny Arnoff, on different sessions they've done, and everything at Royer that gets put out gets run by Ross, because he's got such great ears, and there are times when it's come back and he's like, guys, you need to rethink this, and we have. And he's recorded some of the heaviest guitars I've ever heard and some of the sweetest strings I've ever heard. He kind of gets the whole picture. His Grammys are with Keb Mo, and I think they were both with Keb Mo, right, Ross? Or
I got one. I got a Grammy with Ziggy Marley. I got
Ziggy.
Yeah, I got one with Ziggy. I got two with Keb Mo, and then I got one that I'm associated with Quincy Jones on the.
Gotcha. Okay, so
a
lot of well-earned recognition there, and then also, you've worked with, you did Eddie Van Halen's last record, and sort of changed up how he's doing his guitars. There's just so much that we've got such a deep history. So I just want everybody to know, Ross is a good friend of Royer's, and he's got a whole lot to offer. Any questions that come in on the chat for Ross, get those questions in, because we'll probably get a lot, and he's got a lot to offer here. So Ross, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really good to have you.
Yeah, John, thanks for the sweet pimping. We're pals for a long time. I appreciate it. The relationship started out of microphones, but has led to feeling like we're family. So I appreciate that.
Yep, you bet. A lot of good hang time. By the way,
I think Amalia's mic is open.
It is for us. I don't think it is on the stream. So we're going to leave it like that, because if she closes it, then we start getting messages across the stream. Unfortunately, we just figured that out. So
okay,
we'll hear that. I hope it doesn't bug you too much. We're hearing some cars go by at Royer, but it sounds like a spaceship going by. But anyway, look, it's happy hour. I got a cold one here in my, I don't know if you can see it, my Royer pint glass. I think Ross has a hot one in his coffee cup.
Yeah, coffee, since the other beverages aren't the ones that work for me anymore.
Right. I got my coffee too in my Royer cup, and got the whole gamut here. So Ross, we've got some time here to just hang and talk. I think what was the first thing you did when I met you? You were working at Rumbo. You were spending a lot of time at Rumbo back then.
Actually, the first thing you did, you brought mics to me at Sound City, and right. I was in there actually with Keb Mo, working on his first record, and the first thing I did is I put up the two 121 protos that you gave me to use on a B3, because you brought two microphones, because I said it'd be good to use them in stereo, or to try them on something like a B3. And I put them up on the B3, and I loved the mid-range immediately. And I think I hit you back pretty immediately, the next day or whatever. And I was like, these things are, pardon me, fucking awesome. And I was working on that Keb Mo, a lot of guitars, a lot of different guitars, resonators and all sorts of guitars. And I started using them on guitars. And not to take credit for something that, it's weird to take credit for something that not really to take credit for, because the microphone does all the work. But I know that I was one of the very first people to put your microphones right up on a cabinet to see if they could hold up, because my history with ribbons goes back to the 80s on metal. You know, like particularly like Motley Crue, we did all the guitars for Motley Crue in Rumbo, and I was blowing up 44s and 77s every single day and having to send them out to the dude on the East Coast, Clarence something or other, who was the
Clarence
RCA.
Kane.
Yeah, he was like the RCA guru. And, you know, we had a constant flow of microphones going to him and coming back, because you couldn't use those mics at the volumes that I was recording those guitars, like particularly on Girls, Girls, Girls. They sounded amazing, and then they'd blow up. And I'd learned early on you couldn't put a Coles up close, but you could get the RCA closer. And the BK5s would hold up, and obviously the Beyer M160s held up longer. Eddie Kramer, I know, used those on
Hendrix.
But so I loved and have loved ribbon mics, you know, my whole career, because I got turned on to them by real engineers. But they couldn't hold up to electric guitars. So my thing was like, if you really want me to check these mics out, let me see if I can blow them up. And not like I want to blow them up, but if they don't blow up and they're great, what a great thing. And like just cut through now, that was 96, I think, if that makes sense, somewhere like around maybe 96.
Oh, it would have been, it was 90, 99. That's when, or 98. That's when we opened.
Well, you weren't open yet. This was before you were open. So then it would have been 97, 96, 97.
Yeah. Yep.
There was nothing. These were prototypes. These were like before you guys were a company, like, you know, like selling microphones. So I like to take credit where, and just say that, like, you know, not without patting myself on the back, but just because the microphones are so awesome. I've never blown a Royer ever on a guitar.
I've heard some really loud guitars too from you. The Coal Chamber thing was 120 watt Rivera, dimed, and I felt when I was standing in front of that cabinet, it felt like my skeleton was being fractured when that guy started stomping on it. But I know you had 121s like right there.
And I was also using them on the bass rigs on that on the next record, on the other one of that project, which was Devil Driver. But like I said, I like to say that I'm the guy that like pissed off not your boss, but your partner, where he was like, tell him he can't do that. He's gonna be blowing
everybody so bad, man.
and eventually
I don't think we realized he could take that much level.
Yeah, eventually he caved in, and he was like, you know, and I mean, because I mean, you know, Rick and I love you guys, and I didn't do it to intentionally piss you guys off, but it was like, I got to hear if these things can do that thing up on a cabinet, which now is like time tested, and it's really where the beauty is, that you can put it up. Not like you always need to, because you don't need that much proximity. You know, proximity being the closer you get to a source, the more low end. But to have that proximity and the ability to put it in phase with a 57, where you need the proximity out of a 57 because it's so mid-rangey and so, you know, hammer-fisted in the mid-range, that you got to get, you know, you got to get the 57 right up there. And if the Royer has to then come back or be moved away from the phase correlation spot. So, you know, I love that about the microphones, you know, because I get to use, and literally every single guitar except, like, say, a mono guitar with a 67 on like an old Twin or a Tweed, every single guitar I've done now for, I mean, do the math, was it 25, 26, 27 years, 20, you know, whatever, 25 years or more, has been with you guys.
Yeah. Pretty nice. Speaking of guitars, we have a question. We're just going to try to keep up with the questions while we're rolling. El Topo Records, guy there has said, Ross, do you record the same guitar running through several amps at the same time?
I do, actually. Like with, I'm a big fan of multi-amp setups. Like, just like I like with one of the things that we did with Eddie that I feel like that
Eddie
was,
Van Halen.
yeah, like when I came into Eddie's world to make that last record, after, you don't come, and again, God rest his soul, what a beautiful cat, and became a very dear friend. I love to be able to have a couple of different possibilities. So like with Ed, he had, a lot of different amps, and the whole thing with Ed was the fact that his sound was always like one performance, basically. There's very little Van Halen that's like a bunch of overdubs and stuff, the way a lot of rock records are made with doubling the guitars. Eddie was so performance driven that it would have been almost impossible for him to double himself, because everything's so performance. He would have had to inch his way through each song to see like where the nuances were, and that would have taken away the personality. So the thing that I brought to Ed's table was, hey, you got this great splitter here that is just sitting there. Why don't we use it, and we'll split out to your two favorite heads and two cabs, and instead of it being like electronically stereo, because what he would do a lot, he would take the signal and then he'd put into like an AMS delay or an eventide, and that was his sound for many years. Early on, it was the one side with the reverb and delay going to the other side, but
Gotcha.
for the most part, his career was electronically doubled. And then when I came in, I was like, here, I'm going to show you something, if you're open-minded. So we split it to two favorite heads, two favorite cabs, and then we put the 57s where he always loved them, but then we added the Royers, so that, instead of lopping like a buttload of like 100 cycles on an API 550A onto the 57 to try to get some low end, I kind of taught him that, hey, you can just use the Royers for low end and use the 57s for mid range, and he would sit there and he would play with them. Because most often I combine the two microphones and I just have a guitar. But with him, I wanted to leave them separately so he could sit there at the console and just push up it was like instantaneous, because he's a great engineer. He was, that smile would come over his face when he would push the Royers up, and all of a sudden the womp, that huge womp that he loved out of the low end that he would get out of EQ, the microphones became EQ. And so I do the same thing with the amps. Like, on this record, I'm engineering and producing for Edgar Winter, for his brother who passed away, Johnny Winter. There are a lot of different guitar players, and we've been, cutting in a lot of different places, but I always bring some amps. And if, like say Warren Haynes shows up and he's got his two favorite amps, I'll add a third amp. And so like his guitar part, like his track is two 412s, but then my little tweed in the middle. And then he had another little amp that he wanted to sub out for that. And so sometimes it's the more the merrier. Other times it's like, you record them, and then maybe when I go to mix, I'll still combine them to one side. But what they do give is a nice, like, not stereo because it's a mono source, but if you have them in phase, they still breathe left to right. And so instead of just having the guitar coming down the middle, eating up your kick and snare, you can have them wide and they still sort of source to the middle, but they still stay out of the middle where they don't clump up your center of your mix.
Wow. And they don't end up with that sort of almost phasey two guitar thing, and they've got that immediacy of one guitar.
Yeah. Anytime I'm doing a one guitar thing, I like to have a couple of amps because I get to pan them out and keep them out of the center, because I do like to have the immediacy sort of, instead of just lopsided in the mix where your head sort of cocks like,
right.
You know what I mean? It's just, I'm sort of weird that way. I like to have symmetry, but I do like to have the kind of, they breathe differently because the speakers are breathing slightly different.
Nice. I remember when you went up to Eddie's, you were going to take up some 121s, and you called and said, "What else do you think?" And you ended up grabbing a couple of the 122 Vs, the two ribbon mics. And I think you put those up on his cabinet, and he ended up picking up 4 of them, I think, for the studio.
Yeah, he bought a few. He bought them for the road to have as spares for the road, and he took them out, and we used them on tour.
Yeah, as a and it was great to hear those guitars with some ribbons on them. Just all that stuff going on at the bottom was even tighter. So we've got a couple other questions here about Mike and Eddie. Mike asks, "Is that phase distance you mentioned, is it fixed?" I'm not exactly sure what he means there.
Well, it is fixed, and we did a video prior sometime in the 2000s with Tim Pierce and I, but now you guys have that axe clip, right? What's it called? Is it
the axe mount? John? This guy,
axe
the axe mount.
Yeah. So John and I have talked a lot about this. Basically, if you know where the ribbon is on a Royer, where John can take the microphone and point it at us so you can see the flange, and you see that flange, the ribbon is being held by that flange, basically. And then on a 57, it has the little pop screen plastic. So the diaphragm of the 57 is slightly receded from the edge of the plastic. So if you turn it so we can see it facing down.
Oh, like this?
Yeah, so you can see that. So basically, that flange is approximately where the capsule is. Like, the thing I said to John is, at some point you could just rip the capsule off of 57. You could really see where the diaphragm is. But basically, you don't want the very front of the mic to be at the flange, because you're not really in phase at that point. Because even that quarter of an inch or whatever makes a difference to the phase. But that's basically where I've positioned the microphones for the last 25, 26 years. So wherever the Royer goes, the 57 follows, so that I'm always in relatively perfect phase. I mean, as perfect as phase is, because there is no such thing as absolutely perfect phase with two microphones, but you can be pretty darn close. And so that clip makes it really, really easy for me to have them both connected, always connected, and then to have them on one stand. Because for years and years, guys that work with me always saw me laying on my belly with a flashlight, with a mag light,
many times, putting up 2 or even 3 mics and trying to get them all dead right.
Yeah.
And then you better not touch those stands.
Sorry?
I said, and then you better not touch those stands.
Yeah, 2 stands or 3 stands, because I also like a 421. One of the few uses of the 421 that I really like.
Cool. Well, there's that. We've got another question here from Rick, and this is more of a personal thing, which is awesome. Ross, when did you first get started in recording, and how old were you then?
Hi, Rick. Hey, man. Wish I could see you, buddy. So I was that kid that was always like, I played in bands and was a guitar player, and as a drummer, and played other instruments, but then eventually played in bands as a guitar player. And I was always the guy that was the kid that did the sound system, and I was a nerd. I was a nerd musician, / jock, and bottom line was I was always interested in recording and gear. And so as a kid, I had a really good experience. I went out to a studio. I grew up in New York, in the city, and I went out to a studio out on Long Island that was owned by Foghat. And it's the homage that I have, because my handle that I have is Boogie Motel. And Boogie Motel is the name of the record that they did at Boogie Hotel that has Fool for the Side. And so I was out there with a band that were friends of mine, and they did their first recording at the Boogie Hotel. And I kind of caught the bug at that young age that this is where I ended up having this, it piqued my, this is something I think really I love, seeing how they're doing this. But I ended up coming out to the West Coast and being a guitar tech and a drum tech and a production manager for a lot of different people that I'm still deeply friends and family with today. Jackson Brown, David Lindley, worked for Mick Fleetwood and Fleetwood Mac, and Christine McVie and Ry Cooter and particularly Jim Keltner and a drummer named Ian Wallace, who passed away, who played with Dylan and then Lindley and Don Henley and that whole clan that I call the Mellow Mafia. So I was fortunate to experience recording at that level as a tech and as a dude that was like bringing gear into the studio. So there were a lot of amazing experiences in that, coming up and seeing how these guys made records at like Record One and Sunset Sound, and carrying gear into, bringing gear in and then camping out in the studio with these guys. So I started basically engineering records, in the very early 80s because I got put in the chair. I got thrown into the chair by David Lindley and people that were like, I knew what their sound, and I learned that like the thing that was the most standout thing about this, without just telling a life story, which is like, okay, we didn't come hang out to hear this guy tell his life story. The thing I learned very early on was that it was all about the source. And because I knew what Lindley's guitar sounded like, or Rye's guitar sounded like, or Jim Keltner's drums sounded like, or Bob Glob's bass sounded like,
and what to really listen for in that stuff and what to try to capture.
Yeah, because I was setting the stuff up and I was tuning and I would be changing the heads, and I was the guy creating, like helping create the source, because I was wiring cables and making sure that the batteries had full, 9 volts, and making, all that stuff, so that when Lindley sat down to play, and then whatever engineer he was working with, what was coming out of the speakers wasn't what was coming out of the room. And he would be unhappy. And then I'd be sitting there and he'd go, hey man, go just check out, make sure that our shit's like sounding like it's supposed to sound like. So I'd go out and I'd listen to it and I'd come back in and I'd go, yeah. And he'd be sitting there going, why is this guy that's sitting in the chair not getting out of his chair and walking out into the room? Why is the engineer not doing that? Why is my guitar tech doing that? And why is my guitar tech telling me that, yeah, it sounds like the way it's supposed to sound? And why is it not translating into the room? Same thing with drums, And so I learned very early on that what you hear, the job of the engineer at the first most basic level is to get this to translate, and if it's not coming through the speakers, why is it not coming through the speakers? And I learned that the really great engineers, the guys that I still look up to today, would get out of their chair, they'd walk out in front of the drum kit, they'd have the cat play, they'd go, okay, that one tom there is like going woo, woo, woo. And, your hi-hats are really bright, maybe we'll change that. Or if this is what we want, let me go in and get it to translate. Or if the guitar amp is really bright, you hear it. Now, that's where the guy, would maybe say to the musician, is this the sound you want? And the guy's like, yeah, I'm happy with that. Then if it's like a really bright sound, you go move the microphone. And so I learned that really early on, that like, it's all about the source. And then it's our job as engineers / producers eventually to capture it at the source in a way that translates through the speakers. Because the next thing I learned was that the greatest performances happen when the musician was happy. If the musician's not happy, if he's not inspired by the sound that you're giving him, he's not going to play up to his potential. Because I worked with guys that were sound merchants. David Lindley was a sound merchant. He worked really hard on his sound. Ry Cooder worked really hard on the sound. Lowell George, Keltner with his drum. All these cats worked really hard at their shit sounded like them. So it's not coming out of the speakers. It's not their job to change it because you're lazy and you don't know how to position a microphone. So that's what I got.
Ross, I was just going to say, when I was a younger guy, I was a guitarist and doing some recording in Philadelphia. And that's what got me so frustrated back in the day. It would sound so good in front of the amp. And then sometimes in the control room, it was like an approximation, but not even a good one sometimes. I remember once working with an engineer who was pretty well-known guy, and we got a better sound plugging into a rat distortion pedal and an MXR compressor straight into the console than he was getting out of the amp. It was like, go in there and spend some time, but some people just won't do that. So the guys who do and really listen to sound and then try to capture that,
because in the end, I feel like in the end, I'm like a guy that, the first thing we want to do is be a good photographer, and then we can do Photoshop. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
if we're thinking about how to save a bad recording before we get a good recording, it's kind of ass backwards. So I learned that early on, is that it's about the source. And then the thing I learned, subsequently, was that you can capture the source through so many different ways, obviously, because microphones are all about the next. I was asked this the other day in a question: what's more important, your preamp or your microphone? Which is, like, to me, really silly, because we made records on consoles, so the whole console was one set of preamps. So it wasn't like today everybody has like their a zillion boutiques, and I'm guilty of that too. And it's fun, but it's like, really, just give me, if you were going to say all I got's a Mackie, I'd be like, great, I have great microphones. If you said, all I have is crappy microphones, but I got a Neve console, I would be like, give me my microphones, because the Neve console isn't really going to help a bunch of crappy microphones. A little bit, but not really. It's all about the source. And then, the only like caveat to that is my dear brother Nico Bolas made a whole record on 251s with the Mavericks. And then the next record, he made a whole record on 57s to prove to Raul and the Mavericks that it wasn't the microphones, it's the fact the Mavericks are a badass band. And Nico's a great engineer enough to make a great sounding records on all 57. So, in the end, a cruddy carpenter blames his tools. So,
and Nico is good, and that band is so badass. I've spent some time in the studio with them, and they just always pump. So it's I can see Nico doing that, but very few people can do that, and it's so much easier. He was proving a point, maybe, but it's so much easier to just get the right mic on a source. And
Nico's got the cojones to do that. I don't have the balls to do that. Honestly, I'm just going to come right out and say it. I'm straight up about it. I do not have the cojones to do that, man. I wouldn't be able to trust myself. My mind would be like, this is not as good as it could be if I didn't have my Royers or whatever.
Yeah, right. I know. You'd be freaking out. Nico's probably like, I don't care. I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to make it work. It could be better, but it's gonna be great. Yeah, Nico's
man. I don't know. We should have brought him on today. He would be way more entertaining.
Ross, you're great though, man. I'm glad you're here. We'll get Nico in on this another time, because he is an awesome guy. I was at Blackbird last year, and walked in one day, and I didn't even know they were there. Al Schmidt and Nico were both working with the Mavericks, and talk about some ball busting between the two of them. They're having a good time.
I just had an experience the other day. Again, like the embarrassment of riches that we are surrounded with, and I'm surrounded with, always just sort of stops and makes me go, gosh, I'm really grateful to have the friends and people around me, and to know Al, and to be friends with Al, and the humility of a guy like Al. Because just the other day, I was listening to Jackson Browne's Late for the Sky, because for some reason that record like holds this place in my heart, as far as like, it's very hopeful, but it's also it's like there's a lot of grief in the world right now. Now, obviously we're not going to get political, but today is a brighter day, from yesterday than it was 2 weeks ago. But there's, 4,000 people dying, and people out there, drug addiction, all sorts of stuff going on. So I was like listening to Late for the Sky, thinking, I listened to, and said to myself, I would like to work with these, if I ever worked with people of this caliber, it would be great. And then cut to just a few years later, I'm tuning guitars for David Lindley. But I was listening to Late for the Sky and just marveling at the quality of the sound of the record. And, besides the songwriting, which is just, one of the greatest batch of songs that Jackson ever wrote. And I look in the credits, it says produced, engineered, and mixed by Al Schmidt. And I was like, damn, And the same thing happened a bunch of months ago because I was helping John McPhee of the Doobies, because I've been working with the Doobies for years, and we were doing one of these COVID things. There's a bunch of them that came out this year with the Doobies. Listen to the Music, Blackwater, and then Feeling All Right with Dave Mason. And I was listening to Alone Together, which is another one. Like, that record came out in colored vinyl in 1972. I remember it distinctly. It had the beautiful colored vinyl. And to me, that's the best Dave Mason record ever made. So I was listening to that a little while back and looked at the credits on that, and it was like, again, another Al Schmidt, mix and
Wow.
So, it's like, mastery is when you get an artist like that makes a record like that, and then you got a dude like that who, that was 1972. So I don't know, that's like, 50 years ago, and Al's like 90 now. So,
And if you walk behind him, it looks like you're walking behind a guy in his 30s, because he does Pilates, he keeps himself in shape. The guy's sharp as a tack. It's like, amazing guy. I want to be Al Schmidt if at all humanly possible. If I can be like Al in my late 70s, the way he is right now, I'd be so happy. Remotely. Yeah. Al's the godfather for a whole lot of reasons. We've got a couple other questions.
I guess I jumped to there because, Nico and Al are super, super tight too. So those are two of my dearest friends. All right, more questions.
From RLH Vids, do you typically expect to EQ the 121s when using them on guitar cabs? For you, is EQing the 121s, adding top end perhaps, just part of the ribbon thing?
I guess I misstated or misunderstood my statement. I use a 57 and the Royer flat blended together, and if I want more mid-range, I add more 57. If I want more lower mids and more low punch, I add more 121. I bust them to one track. That's the way I do guitars. I do not keep them separate. When I worked with Eddie, I kept them separate so that he could play with the blend that was recorded and see how much, and if he wanted more low end, he would push up more 121. And when I say low end, I don't mean like just like 60. I mean like the lower mids, where a 57 has like a real clack around like 1 to 4K. It's not high extended, but it's very nasal. Like a 57 general is a very nasal mid-range, where the 121 has a much lower frequency in its mid-range. And so the two of them together create a sound that I don't need to EQ, particularly on guitars, but I blend them together so that I'm way more my instincts are way more in play when I'm recording than if I don't, I can spend forever trying to figure out what the right blend was that was intended. So I don't want to have to think about it later. I want one track of guitars. That's my guitar sound. So I bust them together. And the thing that I may do, if I feel it's needed, and I have done this a lot in the past, if I like the sound of an API, because API 550As or 560s, the older ones that I have a certain harmonic distortion that's really sexy, musical. So sometimes I'll bust them both into, on the bus, a 550A or a 560, and I might put and breathe a little like 3K on the whole thing, or on the 560, I might breathe that 1.5 or 2 or whatever the frequency is. So, but it's more about getting the tone of the API than it is needing EQ, because it's a lot easier later to add high end or some EQ on it if it's needed. But often the mid-range, that high clack, is going to come from a little more than 57. And there is an EQ I really like that I got a couple of years ago, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, from Chandler when he released the passive EMI little strip, the 500, that's got the perfect frequency for guitar, and it's got 90 on the bottom. But in general, I'm not EQing my guitars, and I'm definitely not compressing them unless it's a Strat playing clean, stratty stuff where, you know, that takes to an 1176 really well. And so if I'm going to do a little bit of that, I probably will do that on the way in, because that's something I like to glue a guitar sound in that when I go to mix, it's part of the building the house process.
Wow, man, I hope this is being recorded. I think it is, but I want to go back and listen to that again. Ross, thank you. Another question. Oh, actually, this isn't a question. Check this out. Shout out from Dusty. Miss you both. This is so cool. Dusty Wakeman.
Oh,
yo, hi.
our other brother, man, Dusty, I miss you, dude. I mean, I got to tell you, the highlight of the NAMM show is always walking down that row and being able to pop into the Royer Mojave booth, which is like, it's like, you know, you guys are like going home for me. I mean, you know, come on, both you guys. I mean, we got to give Pimp out to Mojave because, I mean, you know,
yeah, that's the Royer sister company. And yeah, Dusty's been the president of Mojave for what, 15 years?
Yeah, because if you look at my drum setup, you're going to see Mojaves all over the place. And, you know, occasionally I'll put up, you know, one of the, you know, 301s or the small 201, you know, I mean, it depends what I'm going for. But in general, I'm pretty consistent with a 57 and a Royer. I got a guitar sound. So I love you, Dusty.
Right on. So you just mentioned drums and the Mojaves you use on there. And you've got an interesting drum room thing going that has actually become known as the Hogarth Method. You want to talk about that for a minute? I saw it on Kenny Arnoff for the first time and ended up taking about 50 pictures of it. I'm like, this is so cool. When I heard it in the room, I had to come out and shoot it and just get every angle and, you know, try to act like a, you know, like a don't know anything engineer. What's the measurement? Let me get this just right so I can try to recreate that one day. That was amazing.
I think that came from, I think where it got seen for the first time was down at a tape-op convention in New Orleans when I was put into one of those conference rooms to record drums or to, I don't know what we were talking about, honestly. I mean, all I know is that I just went to this like guerrilla mindset because I'd been doing this thing for a while. When you gave me the SF-24 to start using and playing around with, the first thing
I stereo ribbon microphone. You've got that XY pattern facing like this.
So one of the first things I started playing around with was to see how I could use it on a drum kit. And I just put it in front of the drum kit and it sounded awesome, but I had a hole in the center. So I decided to fill in that hole with another ribbon mic in figure 8. And so what happens is you get figure 8 going this way in front, then you get figure 8 going this way, getting the sides, you know, because you have the Blum line, you know, like, you know what I mean? It's figure 8 going both ways. And then the center's filled. And so with the other one. So basically I did that on the drum kit to just show that even though I'm a guy that can use a zillion microphones on a drum kit, and I'm known for it too, because I do that, you could record the whole drum kit with basically 2 microphones, and it ends up being 3 capsules because you have the Blum line, and then you have the other 1 microphone, and you basically touch their capsules. You basically touch them together so they're in phase, and you have this, you know, Blum line matching a figure 8. And we did it in that conference room, and you know, whatever I did that day, I hit it really hard with a bunch of compression or whatever, and people afterwards were coming up going, that was freaking awesome, man. What the heck was that? And it was
that was a big buzz there. Everybody was talking about that. And then you've done it a lot since then. And you actually did it at it. We did a session where we took the singer who had won a TV show, Lucas Rossi, went out to Sweetwater, and Ross came out with us. And Kenny Arnoff came out to play drums because Kenny and Ross worked together so much. And so Ross mic'd up Kenny's kit with this, you know, the stereo mic in front, about 6-7 feet in front, and then the 122V, I think, right underneath it, to get that stereo lobe facing the kit, and then that center up the middle. And there's a video of that session and Ross explaining his methodology up in our audio video library. There's a ton of videos with Ross up there. There's all the Ross Hogarth, Tim Pierce guitar videos. There's like 8 videos on how to use the Royer 57 blend, how to use the Royer by itself, how to stereo mic, all sorts of different stuff. But the one with Kenny, it's fantastic. And he goes through, you see exactly where that mic is. You see with graphics, the patterns and how it's capturing it. And you get to hear those in the room. That video's got a lot of views. And if you want to go into Roy's library and see it, you can see what a lot of people are calling the Ross Hogarth method now on the drums. And man, whenever I can hear that on a drum set, it's just it gives you so much of the kit, and it's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, something about the ribbon, and you say this when you teach your class, and it's something that I learned just through experience early on, was that the ribbons actually listen to the sound. They replicate the sound very similarly to our tympanic membrane in our ear, because the tympanic membrane, it basically takes air pressure and sends the impulse to our brain as sound. And that, the ribbon is like a membrane, just really, creating a sine, some kind of waveform. So ribbons are for me, very much a more realistic than just almost any other microphone, or any microphone. Not always the perfect microphone, but
right.
Often, again, it's all about content, context. But in general, for me, on a lot of instrumentation, horns, strings, piano, guitars, they hear sound very musically, and are very often really forgiving in the high end and the mid range. Which for me, digitally these days, not to diss on anybody's, microphones, but there's a lot of Chinese capsules, really bright, shrill Chinese capsules out there.
Bringing the pain. Bringing the pain.
Yeah, they bring the pain. You put them up, and it's a microphone that maybe one of my heroes is pimping, and I put it up, and I'm like, ouch, can't use that.
Yeah. That's not to say there aren't some great condensers out there you want to throw up on a lot of sessions, but there are so many that are ouch. You put them up, and what is it about that's just kind of tearing my eyes out? But like yes. You were saying, Ross, the ribbon hears things so much like the human ear. We always said that in our ads for a couple of decades. Hears like your ears, because more than any other kind of microphone, a good ribbon hears things very much like the human ear does. And when you're looking to capture something the way it sounds in the room, you throw a ribbon up. I mean, if you use a pop vocal or something, you need that high-end cut for articulation, or you want your cymbals to dance more in the highs and have a quicker dynamics response. You have your condensers up for that, for rock and pop stuff. But when you want things to sound the way it sounds right there at the source, you put up a ribbon and you get so close to it. And like Ross was saying, you start with that. You start with reality. And then you can go into Photoshop if you want. You can go into mixing and mess with it and get creative. But if you start with reality, you're not starting with mistakes you have to fix. You're not starting with things you're not pulling up the faders and going, oh man, I need to DS or get this thing together. You're just starting at reality, and it's a pretty nice way to start.
Well, one of the things about the SF-24, just to finish that thought too, is the fact that, Blumline in a stereo mic, not just connecting two mics together, like you can do Blumline easily with a pair of microphones and get their capsules to sort of do the Blumline for you. But the beauty of the Blumline fixed stereo microphone is that it collapses to mono super easy. So I've been using it on B3s ever since the mic showed up, because I started doing Blumline after you had given me the mics when I was doing Keb-Mo, before I had Royers officially. And then somewhere early 2000s, I threw them up on that John Fogerty record I engineered, because you brought the stereo mic in for me to test, because I've got a relationship where you do bring me microphones before you're going to release them, and I get to play with them, and I get to go, wow, This is incredible. Or
I want to know what you think of them.
Yeah, so I guess I have a reputation for being brutally honest. I think I've gotten a little better at saying what I mean and not saying it mean. I think if that's anything that comes with age,
Yeah,
is that
I'll
little
mellow a little
that,
bit.
there's that meme where it's like a salt and pepper, it's like a salt shaker, and it says sarcasm, and it's like I sprinkle this shit on everything. But the Blum line is great for that because I can put it up in front of a B3 and I can just pull it back to where my ear hears that Leslie being really musical.
Yeah.
And it doesn't spin your head around like two microphones right up in the cabinet or on the outsides or whatever, because you put it in front, put a pop screen on it so it doesn't get the whoosh whoosh, and it just sort of sits there and creates a really nice natural sound on an organ. And again, part of the deal with engineering and making records is like we can get so caught up in the process sometimes that we forget that you got a musician waiting for you to do your job. And so I've learned and I learned it really early on when I was a roadie. It wasn't about me, it was about the audience, man. And if it's about you and you're getting in the way of the musician playing a great show, so the whole thing is to be prepared, but also to like make it happen, like make this happen. So part of the thing is to have some techniques that give results quickly. And if you have microphones that deliver a result and you don't have to labor over it, I know that I can put the Royer and the 57 on that axe clip and throw it up on one stand now. And anytime someone wants to change an amp out, I just pull the stand back, they change it out, you shove it up, go look at it, boom, put it on there, and I can get a guitar back in action in about 30 seconds, where it used to be like two stands and the whole thing. And the same thing with a B3. It's like, you want an organ sound, throw the SF-24 up, put it in front, look where the little thing, boom, go in, push the faders up, left, right, here we go. And
nice.
that's,
yeah,
make music.
Yes, make music, but learn how to do it quickly because that's part of your job. Well, Ross, I don't even know how. It seems like we got started about 5 minutes ago, but we're out of time. We're going to have to say goodbye to everybody. I really, really appreciated you being here, man. This was so good. It's always great to hang with you, even virtually like this. And I can't wait for the world to be such that we can get back together and throw a hug on and go get some food. But thanks so much for being here, brother.
It's only 2:47.
I think we got, but we have 45. We had 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I know. I know.
Is there any one last really cool? Is there any one last really cool question?
No. Friend of mine, Paul Andrews, gave a shout out.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
How much do you go for transparent recording versus character recording? What would be, in your experience, the percentage of both on a project?
The question was the difference between, like, do I go for transparent recording, or what was the word you used? What was the word?
Character.
Character. I would love to have both, but if I was going to go with anything, I would like to get out of the way. Character means that I'm imposing my will on the sound. That means that I'm trying to change what is on the recording side. I would much rather be the guy that captures the musician's performance as transparently as possible so that later I can contour it. But that doesn't mean putting my years of experience, or even when I was younger, just putting my instincts and my intuition on it. So it's a balance, I think, between the two. But if I was going to go and lean one way or another, I think I'm more well known for a guy that creates realistic, honest, direct, in-your-face kind of music, and is not the guy that, will search for days for effects that maybe in 6 months from now are going to make me dislike my recordings or mixes. I try to go for timeless if there was anything I would say, and that goes back to listening to, like, Al Schmidt's, Late for the Sky. It's timeless. There's something about that, the greatest records are timeless. If you listen to anything that's timeless, it doesn't matter when you listen to it, whether it's Miles Davis's Kind of Blue or anything. There are records that are really cool when they came out, like Shock the Monkey, but that's really hard to listen to right now, because for me, every time I hear it, I hear 1982 or 3 or whenever it came out, because of the effects and all that stuff. So anytime I'm using an effect or doing something that imposes my will on the music, that's going to make it less timeless, I have to have a very fine-tuned meter to say, is this cool? And is this really something I want on here? So I tend to think that honesty tends to prevail. So I would go with the transparent, but that doesn't mean that I don't do things to enhance that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you. Wherever that question came from, thanks. That's a good one.
So I get to say thank you to Internet World, right? And thank you to Royer. Thank you to John and Amalia, who you don't see behind the scenes, and Rick, who helps make everything happen and is part of all your, you guys are part of my life, part of my recordings. I am very grateful to have you as friends and family, and to get to use your gear and have it help me make records. So I appreciate it.
Ross, thanks so much, man. It's been a great, long friendship, and I'm looking forward to a whole lot more of it. And thanks so much for being here today, because this was just so cool. I mean, this went fast. So cheers.
Cheers. Mocha
My
Java.
playing class here too. Mocha Java and just a little brewski, a little afternoon brewski. Take care, brother. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it out there.